So what I've seen with Aberdeen is very predominantly conservative. I don't know if that's true or I've it's what I've noticed, especially with the independence campaign that they voted no, was it?
Yeah, so I think I think if you haven't been here, I can tell from your accent you're not Aberdonian.
Yeah, I'm definitely not. No, Aberdeen, yeah.
So if you've lived a reasonable amount of time in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, you would probably actually be surprised that we voted so heavily for independence, because I mean certainly, and I'll give you a bit of family background. I talked about my dad, who's an SNP activist. So him and my mum came from Clydebank down in near Glasgow,
Hmm.
and then they took us up when I was very young to live in Aberdeen, because my dad was an engineer, went from shipbuilding to the oil industry. Was either that or probably never work again. So we came up here. So I consider myself Aberdonian, even though I wasn't born here, grew up here. And at that time, my father would have been campaigning in elections for the SNP throughout his entire life up here, and we would not be doing particularly well at all. But actually, in Aberdeenshire, the predominant um, sort of political leaning in Aberdeenshire was Lib Dem,
Mm.
and they would just gut us at every turn. In Aberdeen City, it would be Labour, but it would also be anti-independence. But then something changed. I think the opening of the Scottish Parliament certainly made a difference, and the SNP started to do really quite well. But the independence, I suppose, the independence kind of feeling in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire would be pretty anti. So when it came to the independence referendum results in Aberdeenshire, you could look at them and you think, well, actually they weren't great. They were probably one of the lowest in the country, but they were still in the 40%, which was far better than you could ever had imagined even 5 years before that. And in Aberdeen City, they were around about the kind of 45% mark, which, was still a massive jump towards independence compared to what it had been before. So although it wasn't enough to get us over the line, and although it wasn't as good as it was in other parts of the country, and although we didn't get our independence, the trajectory of where the votes were going in terms of like anti-independence towards pro-independence is an upward curve. And it's certainly, if you were to look at a difference in the change of attitudes towards independence in the northeast, it's going one way. That's my sunny, optimistic disposition coming in. But it's true, the numbers don't lie, and it's getting better all the time.
Yeah, like you said, do you think since 2014 till now, do you think people's attitudes have kind of changed towards independence? Because obviously, kind of firsthand.
I think optimistically, I thought they would change quicker.
Hmm.
I think particularly after the Brexit result, I was really sort of like bracing myself for a real surge, because I know how strongly people in this area, with the exception maybe of Banff-and-Buchan, but certainly in my area of Aberdeenshire and Aberdeen City, very pro-EU. Um, so when we were kicked out, or the vote was to kick ourselves out the EU, against the wishes of the way people voted in this area, I did think there would be quite a backlash and a very quick surge for independence. Didn't quite happen that way. It's interesting that it didn't. I think I put that down more to people being fed up of big constitutional questions. And I kind of like, can we not have a period of time where we're not talking about leaving the EU, leaving the UK, whatever? We're fed up, we've got election fatigue, we've had so many snap elections, it's just been too much, and people were scunnered. I would say that the increase in the support for independence has been glacial, but over the last 6 months, given the national emergency, the international global emergency of COVID-19, where people have seen, first of all, the handling of the emergency by Nicola Sturgeon versus the handling by Boris Johnson, but I've also seen the limitations put on the Scottish Government in terms of the powers that they have to deal with it. That I think is starting to change people's mind, think, well, actually, it looks like the Scottish Government are doing a better job than the UK Government, and how much better would they be able to do if they had all the powers that the UK Government have at their disposal? So I'm starting to hear neighbours, friends in my village, stop me when I'm out walking my dogs to talk about how well Nicola Sturgeon's doing during this period, and saying things like, pass on my thanks to Nicola. I don't vote SNP, Gillian, or I'm not voted SNP, or I haven't voted for independence before, but I am very impressed with how she's handling things, and I'm also very disappointed in how it's been handled at UK level. So that's starting to make people think, well, actually, maybe some of the arguments around independence that have been made, certainly in 2013-14, about our inability to act like a normal country, is a thing that I should really be thinking about again, because we've seen it evidenced for us in this global pandemic situation. So I think it's not so much a massive wave and surge, but it's certainly gone up a large blip. We just have to, I guess, you don't want to use a horrible situation, but it's almost like you can sit back and you let people make their own conclusions around that situation, because effectively the arguments I've been making are now evidenced in what people are seeing, and people are starting to come to their own conclusions around that.
So do you ever think that we could get a second independence vote? Do you think that it would ever be possible, or do you still think that there's a lot of things holding us back? Or I'd like to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, so this is a question that I suppose the independence movement argues about every day. There's a lot of people in the independence movement, I don't mean the SNP, but the movement as a whole, that believe that Nicola Sturgeon could call an independence referendum. That's actually not the case. She can't. There are things that first of all, to answer your first question, yes, I do think we will have another independence referendum. I think it's inevitable. And I think that the people that will get us that will be the Scottish people asking for one. And that will be evidenced through how they vote next year in the Scottish Parliament election. Not necessarily a general election, because a general election is all the focus is really on London and who gets into number 10. And we've had successive general elections, 3 general elections now, where SNP have got the vast majority of seats. That hasn't made any difference. Where it really does make a difference is the makeup of the Scottish Parliament. It's overwhelmingly independent supporting MSPs. That's effectively the people of Scotland saying, I want this type of MSP with this kind of view on my constitutional future. There's the legal aspect of things, of course, that we had what's called a Section 30 order ahead of it was actually in 2012, part of the Edinburgh Agreement, which actually meant that our referendum was legally binding. There were rules set around it. There was an agreement between the country of Scotland and the Union of the UK that it would be honoured, and it would be so there's precedent there. A lot of people seem to think we can do without that and still hold a referendum. Well, actually, the international community would probably not recognise any result that came from that. And you saw what happened in Catalonia, where they went ahead and had a referendum that wasn't legally binding. And a lot of people involved in that are now in jail, wrongly, in my view. I don't think that would ever happen in the UK, because they're 2 completely different types of government, the Spanish government and the UK government. But I'm not keen on doing all that work that I did in 2013 and 14, and the work of all my colleagues, trying to get an independence vote for a vote that I know would not be recognised by the international community, would be called illegal by the UK government, and the people who don't want independence would boycott